This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs.
Hi, I'm Josh Apter, founder of Manhattan Edit Workshop. This is Filmmaker U's weekly chat with industry professionals. Today we have the editors of Apple TV Plus's Lessons in Chemistry. I'm joined by Matthew Barbato, Geraud Brisson. I Frenched that up enough, I think. And Laura Zempel. And between the three of you, you are the masterminds between putting together a very coherent, very compelling series. I've been reading that they're looking at a season 2. I'm not even sure how that would be possible. You know, I talked to Jason with the cinematographer, Jason Oldak, last week, and felt like I needed to watch his episodes, but I didn't want to watch the last ones and blow it. And I didn't want to start at episode 3, thankfully. So I watched 4 episodes in a day. And it was like, well, not only was I rewarded for not like coming in episode 3 and not knowing what the heck just happened, because obviously something happens, but I got really hooked on the show. And then I just sat that night after the interview, I just started watching the rest of it, and I didn't stop until it was over. And it was really remarkable. Another series that I really enjoyed based on a book was Station 11, and I was sort of likening this to that. It like has a real life to it. But I also I read the book after, and I was saying I really want to read this book now, and I feel like I'm fortunate to have seen it as a piece of as film and filmmaking first, you know, so I can read the book and see how different it is and see what was, you know, what was changed, added, removed, and things like that. But I also get to picture all these great actors in the books when I'm reading it too. So if you would please do me the favor of introducing yourselves, and just a little bit about, you know, where you're from and how you got started. And we can get started talking about Lessons in Chemistry. We'll start, Matthew, since you were the first one on, and we'll start with you. You were the first guy here, so please.
Okay. Well, I'm Matthew Barbato, and I started out, I've done a lot of stuff. I started out in unscripted. I directed unscripted. One of my first jobs was I was a director on the very first Anthony Bourdain series when it was on the Food Network. I've edited a lot of that stuff. But then I made the leap into scripted, and it's mostly did comedy. This is one of my few drama series that I've done. And I've been at it a long time.
Hi, my name is Geraud Brisson. I come from France, but I studied in the States, which is how I ended up in the US. I started as an assistant editor for quite a long time in film. I assisted people like Jay Cassidy, who's been cutting David O. Russell film, or Hughes Winborn, who cut Crash. And then I edited a bunch of a series of independent films and made my way into television eventually, which is really when I could call myself an editor. And more recently, I worked on Lessons in Chemistry, and also edited the movie Coda a few years ago.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, well, we'll start talking once we get everybody introduced. I'm already kind of like chomping at the bit here. So, Laura.
My name is Laura Zempel. I'm originally from Northern California, but I went to school at Chapman University, and I kind of knew I wanted to be an editor probably since maybe since junior high. Thought I would do screenwriting or editing, and then got to school, was terrible at screenwriting and was like not bad at editing. So that kind of put me on the path. And out of school, I did the American Cinema Editors internship. And that's how I got into the industry. I worked as an assistant in mostly TV for about 6 years. And then I started cutting on HBO's Room 104 and sort of stayed in television since. I've done a couple features, but Lessons in Chemistry is my latest show. And it was a real treat working with these guys because they're so talented, and I got to hang out with them every day and learn a lot.
Well, thank you. Well, that actually goes to my first question. Did you work together every day? You know, some series that are, you know, different directors, different editors, you know, can you give us a little bit of insight into how this particular show was put together? You know, because some people cut, you know, at 108 in a vacuum, not knowing what came before. And then, you know, some people know the whole thing and it's all shot and everybody powwows together. And so, you know, why don't you continue a little bit, Laura, with the hanging out and with everybody? How was this done?
So we, from what I remember, we were sort of hybrid where we started doing dailies from home, and then I worked on episodes 5 and 6 with Millicent Sheldon was my director, and we did her director's cut remotely over Zoom. And then once we went into producer's cut, I came into the office, and Matthew and Geraud had done earlier episodes in the series, so they were already working in the office. So that's when I got to meet them. But when I came onto the show, I spoke to both of them on the phone, probably my first day of dailies, just being like, hey, what do you know? What are we doing? What kind of music are we doing? Like, kind of catch me up so I don't have to, reinvent the wheel, because, TV shows, you want to have that element of cohesion. And then once we were all in producers' cuts, we were all working out of an office in Burbank. And, the way TV works, the episodes are kind of divided among the editors, but we would chat in the mornings. And like for me on episode 6, we had a lot of moving parts, and, Matthew and Geraud were really gracious and watched the various working cuts of that episode and gave advice. And so I think that's the benefit to being in office, is if you get stuck on something, you have other editorial brains that can help you solve a problem.
My friends and I would make little videos in our backyards, imitations of Indiana Jones and Star Wars. And, eventually that need to tell stories became more of a technical interest and an interest in the art. To me, what's exciting is using cinema in its full potential, which is rhythm and sound design and music. Our job is to set up expectations and then deliver on them. I'm Brian Cates, and this is my course in film editing.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that collaboration?
I would say that one of the things I really enjoyed about working on the show, obviously working with these guys, and the collaboration that we had. Once I think we got through a certain point in the editing with our directors, there's a lot of interweaving and flashbacks and things that happen in this show that required us to communicate more than I would normally on other shows. And on a lot of other shows, you can kind of do your episode and your executive producer will make sure things track from one episode to the next. But I think we worked really closely, and we're talking constantly about story beats that were happening in other people's episodes and how they were going to pay off. And as we got closer to the end and we were polishing, because we had a lot of room to experiment with this, our executive producer Lee Eisenberg and our great directors Sarah Dina Smith, they were very open to experimentation and changes, and so I just found that we were talking a lot more than I would on other shows to kind of help tell the full story over the course of the whole season.
Mm-hmm. Geraud?
Yeah, for me, when I started in television, which was a little bit later in my career, I discovered how great it is to have colleagues next to you. And I went from feeling kind of isolated in the process to actually making friends with my colleagues and participating more in a collaborating way and continuity throughout the show. And I enjoy the conversation with editors, so I love them. Mm-hmm. And on this show particularly, I had episodes. I mean, first of all, I came in after Matthew had been working on episode 1 and 2, so it was important, like Laura said, that I check in with him to see what he's learned and what the tone of the show started to be. Obviously talking about music, but I think that music question was a question mark for most of us for a long time. And particularly, it was interesting that we also felt in a weird way that each of our episodes was somewhat different from one another. And even though it made sense that they were, because each episode was almost a lesson in chemistry for Elizabeth Zott, or a lesson at least in life. And in that frame, we still had to kind of work on the same show. So we had to do different exercises almost on each of our episodes, I felt. I mean, I had my first episode is through 630's point of view, the dog. So and that was completely different than any other episode. But in that frame, there were montages that referred to what 630 had went through in previous episodes, which we had seen in Matthew's episode in the second one. And same thing, and especially for 8, I had to really work closely with Matthew. Some scenes moved from my episode to his, and vice versa. Actually, no, it's true. And even with Laura, because some scenes from 105 move into episode 4, and so there were moments like that, and those are the experimentation that we were doing. And it's true that we were lucky. I felt like I was lucky, at least, to be in an environment where we were given the freedom to experiment and be proactive in storytelling. And that I give some credit to Lee Eisenberg, Brie Larson, who came in the cutting room, to all of our executive producers and director. I had Bird and Birdie, and for my first episodes, and Tara Meal for the last one. And they were all so great to collaborate with.
No, it does sound like it was everybody was kind of the happy family. I know that's a simple way of putting it, but it did seem, even from what Jason had said, like a lot of really like positive collaboration. He said sometimes, it can get competitive, and you're doing the same job as someone else, even though they're not interfering with one another. And he said it was amazing. They compared lookbooks and they had similar influences, and and I don't want to jump too far. I guess this is a nonlinear process, so I can go to the end. But I do, episode 108 has scenes from many other episodes in the conclusion of the show. So was there a process where you were cutting earlier episodes with that in mind in any way? Like, this is something this is special. This is something, or did you not know that you were going to be, I don't want to call it like the Ralph Rosenblum school of recaps, but in Annie Hall, he did a great job of sort of giving you all of those emotions in this sort of finale. You did that, and you did it very well, but did you know you were even doing that? And how did you collaborate on finding those moments?
Well, I did not know I was doing that entirely. I mean, thank you for the compliment, especially the reference. I come with it. It's pretty humbling. This evolved throughout. I knew there was the idea was scripted. And some of it is always, it's interesting that a lot of the things were in the scripts, and yet they evolved as often. But in this case, a lot of it were in the script. But to the point of where we ended up, not exactly. It was a lot less detailed in some way. And I think I'd done 3 different versions in terms of like ideas of how this end montage would be. But yeah, so I knew some of it and I didn't know some of it. I did go, yes. And even I remember going to Matthew and Laura, even for the fact that there is a scene that is supposed to be a potluck dinner at the end. And I remember, and so everybody was supposed, even that you get it or not when you watch the show, was supposed to bring a dish. And before they started shooting, I remember asking Matthew and Laura, what food was important in their episode that character could bring to the table? And Laura told me about the devil eggs. And I can't remember what Matthew told me, but I did communicate those, and they end up on the table. And yeah. But yeah, it was important to sort of find the right images and find. It was that montage specifically to us was important because we wanted to talk about emotion and not so much about story, and recapping the experience and the connection that happened, because those were the themes of the show, rather than limiting it to the worry was to limit it to one of those meetings, one of those encounters. It wasn't just about Calvin. It wasn't just about Harriet and Elizabeth. It was about relationships, that in the sum of those relationships.
One thing I think we should note is that the series was still being written as it was being shot, and so there was opportunities in there as we were watching early cuts come in. It changed the way some of the scripts happened. I mean, a thing that's out there that is talked about a lot is how much Lewis Pullman's performance change the trajectory of the series. It wasn't intended originally for him to have recurring roles later in the series, but because of his performance. So there's lots of little things like that as things were coming in, we could give feedback to Lee and the EPs and the writers that got incorporated later.
So were you, because I know this is not uncommon, editors will find themselves working on something and then giving some constructive feedback if it's being written while it's being filmed. I mean, sometimes it's like, what was that in I think Flirting with Disaster, Chris Tellison was like, put a hat on the fucking baby, because like they had 3 babies and you could tell they were not the same. That's one kind of note. But were you able to make contributions as editors to, was it as simple as that? Like Pullman's performance is like, we need more, or something about this is special, or is that a decision that's made outside of your experience?
In the case of that, I mean, that was just Lee recognizing what he had when he started to see the dailies, and that was their decision. I think probably it was such a collaborative thing that once the producers started coming into the room and we started seeing the episodes, we were all having group conversations about things. I think there was actually, I remember we got called in one time, all of us, to have like one big sort of committee conversation about certain things, and we talked about what was working and what we could use more of, and I don't remember the specifics of it, but there was a lot of opportunity for our input, and then they made the choices that they made.
Well, that's great. I mean, it sounds all around, from what I'm hearing, a really great collaboration. Laura, so you're, being that you say you weren't a good screenwriter, I disagree, because I think editing does involve that. It's just you're writing it after it's filmed. But how, so what were the challenges of your episodes from a writer of film perspective, considering that's your pencil is a keyboard?
Right. I mean, for me, that's sort of what I like about editing, is it is writing, but it's writing with limitations. And so, you can only rearrange what you're given. So it's scenes, performances, moments, whatever. And like episode 6 specifically, there's so much going on in that episode. It's Harriet and the freeway protests. It's Elizabeth's backstory. It's Mad, finding out about her dad. And there were just so many storylines going on in that episode. And so we ended up moving it around a lot. And my assistant, Lily Wild, became a co-editor on that episode, because I relied on her heavily to sort of keep perspective and keep me in line and keep her like intentions. And she was kind of like my gut check on a lot of these things, because I would try stuff and then pull her in and say, what if we do this? What if we do that? And working with her and Natalie Sandy, one of our other EPs, we all like were a collective brain on that episode. And so many scenes moved around, and like because we were trying to have Elizabeth's story, not detract from what Harriet is going through, and sort of finding ways like, how do women navigate the world, but like giving all of them equal weight. Like there was just so much going on in that episode, and it was really collaborative and really great to have other minds on it, to just find the best way to put it together to really elevate every single one of their stories and give them their own weight and emphasis.
Yeah, I did, and that's something that you definitely notice in the film, is that there isn't really a character without some real meat on the bones, right? Like,
yeah,
even down to, and I think it is written in the book, the associate producer on the show, who falls for her former colleague, does end up taking over the show. I don't know exactly how. I probably read more than I should before I read the book. But it's not just like a throwaway sense of a person. You really do get you taking the time to give them some development as people and arcs, right? So her former colleague, their relationship was one way, but because they butted heads, there was something about that makes them perfect to work together in this other context, right? So I did notice that. I guess I'll this is like a congratulations machine here, this talk with you guys. I'm sorry, but you know, so many shows, these limited series, there are the episodes that you know are just kind of there to, you know, get you to the ones at the end. I hate to say that. I mean, Disney Plus is particularly good at, you know, I have a 13-year-old, so I have to watch all these shows, these Marvel things. But you know, that seems pretty par for the course. It's just there are some episodes in the middle there. They're just like, oh, we had to stretch this out to 8 episodes, and we didn't develop enough that everything is always working. But you have so many gears moving, and so many different characters and storylines and time periods and perspectives, that it really felt, every episode felt necessary, and a building block on the one before it. So again, well, you know, that's what this is for. I'm not going to get on here and say bad work, guys. So I did have one question though. If I did have one thing that I felt like I was asking at the end, and this is an open question, I'm not saying, you know, what you know, why the decision was made, but it did seem like the freeway defeat, where she's tricked, kind of not tricked, but she feels that though something's going to happen, and then when push comes to shove, there's a no vote, and it you know, it doesn't go her way. I was expecting there to be more after that, and it seemed like there wasn't time, or I don't want to say interest, to deal with it. For some reason, it felt under concluded. And I don't know if you guys felt that too, or if there was any pressure from anywhere. Like, was there enough story to be told? There was just a celebration that I felt was a little close to something, you know, like, where are they going? Are they moving the day after Thanksgiving? Because it seems like there's a big problem now. So it's an open question, but you know, that was sort of the only thing I was wondering at the end, like kind of left me scratching my head.
Well, maybe I'll jump because that was my episode, and I know Laura dealt a lot with that storyline, but so please interrupt me, Laura. It was inspired by the true story of what happened in West Adams. So I think that writers were really keen on keeping a sense of reality, and in that storyline and in Harriet's struggles, it is an open-ended. It is true. It doesn't make you necessarily. It doesn't. I mean, you're not the first one who brought it up to me. I feel like it's one moment in the show where you do not feel sort of warm and fuzzy, and it's where it leaves, you know, room for life not being exactly always clean and round ending. On the sense of, were there going to be more? There was no, everything that was in the script is on the screen in this episode. Nothing was taken out. Yeah, maybe, yeah, I understand why. I think Harriet is such, I mean, and the performance of Virginia King is so good that also I think it contributed to the fact that you may want more, I would say. But yeah, I think that those were the reason why we made those decisions, or why those decisions were made, at least. Yeah.
Yep. Like, Laura, it's your fault for not cutting her performances worse so that she wouldn't be so loved, I guess.
It was just impossible. I tried, you know, she's just too good. Yeah, she's phenomenal.
She is, and I don't, you know, I don't look at the. It's not an otherwise warm and fuzzy ending to me. I think it's actually it lands beautifully, and it's complicated like life, and surprising like stated in episode 2, and like I think it delivers on its promise. And you know, that's why the absence of that was really like one of the only things I noticed, that was like, oh, I wondered because you were inside it. The other thing I wonder, and this is again an open question, because there's so much perspective. You know, you're with her so much, right? And then when she's on TV, you're boom, right in her face. And you know, this, I mean, I think it was noteworthy in 103, but there are other places where the first time you see her after the loss is from the side, and not, you're giving her essentially privacy by doing that, or kind of keeping your distance by not like. So what was it like? And did you always have all kinds of choices to make in terms of, am I directly, am I confronting, or do I confrontational coverage? Do I have more, sort of objective coverage? And you made choices, or was this boarded and sort of, was there an architecture to it prior to you getting there? I guess we could start with Matthew.
That's interesting. I would say that, we had just all great directors, and so for every scene they were very intentional about what they were shooting, and so we often had a lot of choices, and I think we were all conscientious of playing the point of view properly. It's interesting that you point out the point of view, because at least in my first two episodes, it is her story, but then I guess the first one is her story, and then the second one is the romance and coming together. So, but then I also have episode 7, which is basically a lot of stuff that we've already told from Calvin's perspective. And so what's interesting about what you ask is that a lot of it was shot for Calvin's episode, but we did reuse a bunch of it, and there were some challenges in terms of finding coverage that didn't feel like Elizabeth's perspective of the same event that we saw earlier. And so occasionally you get to a place where you just didn't want to use the same footage, or you wanted to use it differently, and so we did have to look at that and recontextualize what we had already seen with the footage that was shot for earlier episodes.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? No.
I don't really remember picking angles based on anything other than just like what's the best take, what's the best performance. Like, I think the scene in episode 5 with her and Walter on the steps, like that little intimate scene where he's kind of convincing her that what she is doing is important by being on TV, like a lot of that is profiled just because there was something really vulnerable about having her listen and like seeing her mind change. So, the angles just sort of weren't necessarily intentional, but obviously is something that we are paying attention to as we're assembling it, and what gets the emotion across the best. So it's funny to hear how the viewers interpret it, and how it seems like the pattern or the way it's put together conveys an emotion. It's just cool to hear from the outside.
And some of it is formalist horseshit that is, probably meaningless, because I've edited enough to know that sometimes the best coverage and best performance didn't work, and it's not there, and you don't have it, and you have to work with what you've got, and that's it, and you have to make it work. So,
if I may, I think even if you have limitation, you'd still try to make your choice intentional, no matter what it is. And that is sort of part of our job, to be aware of that, hopefully succeed.
No, you can only, what somebody said, like, they're more proud of the stuff that like they got from a 20 to an 80 than stuff that like started at an 80 and they got to an 85. Like, it's just, if you can elevate that material and you can make it intentional and turn it into something, that's a real achievement. Sometimes it's, you get there and it's like 3/4 of the work is done. It's just, it's all shot well. It's, it just kind of comes together. I'm sure there's nothing wrong with that either. Did you find yourself struggling with any of this material, or was this, did it seem like it all came together fairly easily?
I wouldn't say that I didn't necessarily struggle with the material, but there was so much opportunity to experiment and change, and there definitely were obstacles that we hit in terms of we knew we had to tell the story in a way that it hadn't been scripted, because once you get your material, you always have to look at it fresh, and as you said, it's the last draft of the script. So there was a lot of work, and it was all because we were taking it from maybe a B+ to an A. It was all there, and there was lots of good material and lots of different choices that we could have made. And so there was a lot of experimentation and a lot of moving things around. And occasionally you hit like a script bump. And, Geraud mentioned earlier how we decided to move certain scenes from one episode back and forth. And there's a scene I stole of his that I completely repurposed the the intention of, and we put different dialogue into the characters' mouths than was in there originally to get it, to serve the story point. So there's all that stuff, and we do that in all of, I think, a lot of our shows that we work on. So it wasn't particularly challenging. It was just, just a lot of work and a lot of experimentation.
Mm-hmm. You've done that in documentary or no? Because sometimes you have to do that and it's like, wow, I'm putting words in their mouth. I'm not sure if I, like, this is the safety of scripted. So it's like, that rule doesn't apply, but you say that, it's like, I'm sure you didn't feel any ethical issue taking a scene from an earlier episode and repurposing it and putting other words in their mouths, but it's another tool in the toolbox, right?
Well, I mean, I was going to say, Werner Herzog's style of documentary isn't as true to reality as, and those seem to work too. So
yeah, well, I wouldn't, and I'm not calling documentary the gospel truth by any means. It's just a movie. I mean, it's someone's interpretation, right? But keeping it to this sort of thing. But did you finish all of the episodes before the first was released, or then see it as an entire body of work, or were you like, one was going out while you were cutting and sort of keeping pace? How did that work?
We finished all of the episodes before the first one was released. So we were, I don't know if they all locked in order, but we were working on all of them kind of simultaneously. I don't remember when 1, 2, and 3 locked, but I know for me 5 locked and then 6 locked. And then you guys, because they kind of block shot the first 6 episodes. So 1 and 2 were shot together, 2 and 3 were shot together. Or wait, sorry, 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6 were shot together.
Did you watch it in its entirety from beginning to end once it was all said and done, before it was out?
I feel I was watching it as it went. I mean, I think it was, at least I had to, and I'm sure Laura felt the same way, because we were coming in after somebody else had started it. And also, at least in my case, even that episode 3 was repeating things from episode 2, like I said. So I had to be very much aware of what was done. It was also a question of, now we saw the scene through Elizabeth's point of view in the earlier episode. Now we're seeing it through 630. And like Matthew said, how do you use that coverage? You're not going to make the same choices, because you will show the same action probably to remind you that both characters experience the same thing, but you wanted them to experience it differently. So it was very important for me to be aware of what other people were doing, and especially for the last episode.
Geraud made a really interesting choice, I thought, in 8, because in 7 we meet young Calvin, and I cut the scene, and then he repeats some of the beats of that, but Geraud chose to use a different take of this one shot, and it's the same action, it's the same point of view, but it shifts a little bit. An audience is, I don't think an audience is going to know that they're 2 different takes, because they're just only slightly different. But I think it shifts perspective, and it plays on the idea of memory and how things are malleable and things like that. So I always thought that was really clever.
I also
keep that shot.
So describe, okay, that's very interesting. What does it mean to fight to keep that shot? What's the process like, without getting into any, I don't want to get too deep into it if it's not as pleasant.
I'm joking. There was not much of a fight, but I was asked, do I need, can we use the same shot? Because it's a VFX shot. We had to de-age Beau Bridges in that shot. And at some point, money is a question. So I was asked, and I was absolutely convinced that we couldn't use the same shot that Matthew had chosen, because it makes absolute sense in Matthew's episode. And again, it's about point of view and being, whose scene suddenly you have to be on, which side you have to be for this scene. So, and we were lucky, because I don't think necessarily there was, I'm not sure, maybe she did, but I don't think there was actually a thought that we were going to use that that scene in my episode. And and therefore they probably didn't even imagine that we had to show it through slightly different ways. But
this isn't the shot where
that's-
he's walking in and passes him
that
and
is a
doesn't know
shot.
who it is, because they are
Yes.
slightly different. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's a very expensive alternate take, because Bo is young, and
So,
but he's
so
in a
worth it.
wide shot. It's not. It's of course no. There is that slight variation, that because I think you're trying to not draw attention to it on the one, and you're trying to put it on display in another, and so it makes perfect sense. But yeah, I didn't mean like you guys got into it over that, but I can
Oh,
I can
not,
see
not
that.
between us. Yeah. No. And I
No.
was joking. No.
Yes,
And,
editors don't do that. We're just we create enough of a we express ourselves in a way that the director feels like it was their decision in the first place. That was always how it worked for me. It's like, yeah, that's a great idea that I had 2 weeks ago. So what else is I mean, have any of you read the book? Were you compelled to do it, or are you just like, I got better than the book? I got the movie.
I read the book. I don't know if everyone else did, but I read it just because I was curious. I just wanted to kind of know what I was getting into. Again, I think like starting a mid-season episode, I wanted as much information as possible. I read the book, and I feel like this show, and I hope people who are fans of the book agree, I think the show does a great job of honoring the book and also making some interesting changes. Harriet is a totally different character in the book, and I love her character in the show. I think it adds so much to the story and the time period, and that was really exciting for me to see how they handled that. But the dog is narrates a chapter in the book, and like reflecting that in the episode was a very conscious choice of saying this is for fans of the book who love this, and we want to incorporate it into the show so our audience knows that we too love the story, that we're also asking them to participate.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be
either
honest,
of you
when I signed on to it, I was given a draft of the pilot and the second episode, and I read it, and then I started to read and once I got the job, I started to read the book, and then new drafts came in that were radically different than the first draft and then I just started to get confused, because I had 3 different versions of the story going on in my head, and I couldn't remember which one is the one we were going to execute. So I actually stopped and put the book down and said I have to focus on the script, and so I haven't finished the book.
No, I haven't started the book. Well, you're working on it, but I'm going to be reading. I was telling Jason that I'm reading a horrible book right now, and I might just put it down so I can get this. I'm just like, I can't. It's as much as it's great to read a great book, it's such a drag to read an average book. So maybe I'll just give up. I don't do it a lot because I feel like, well, I started. I mean, I'm invested. Maybe it'll get better. Is there a moment? I know we have to wrap up. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Is there a moment or a sequence that you feel is, whether it's from your own episode or not, that you feel particularly fond of or special to you, and why? We'll start with Geraud.
It may be because of the process. I would say, the montage we talked about at the end of episode 8, because I feel like in that moment, and it's very much in line with the show in some way, this is how sappy I am. It is a little bit of everyone there. I also co-edited this episode with my assistant, Daniel Martins. It was a period of time where I had Lee Eisenberg was in the cutting room, Brie Larson was there, Michael Costigan was there, Natalie Sandy. Everybody kind of gathered around that time when I was working on this. Everybody had contributed to it, and like I said, I definitely had checked in with Laura and Matthew to build this sequence. So I would say that the end of episode 8 to me maybe is the sequence I would select.
I have a few, but I think the one I have to go with is the freeway protest, just because I knew, getting the script that was going to be a huge scene, and the way Millicent shot it was like fantastic. She did a great job, but there were, 3 cameras, multiple takes of just like extras getting pulled away. And it was not really a paint by numbers scene to put together. It took me like 2 days to get it together, which is a lot in television. Like you got to move quickly, but it was the only scene they shot that day. So I had quite a lot of footage, and I worked really hard on it, and I got it together in my editor's cut, and was very, very happy with how it played, and showed it to Millicent for the first time. And she and I talked on the phone while she was directing, and she would kind of tell me, behind the scenes stuff like, okay, so this is really good, or like this take, or like don't use that. And when we would talk, she'd always ask like, how's the protest? How's the protest? How's the protest? And so when she finally saw it in the editor's cut, she was very happy. And then she had like 2 notes, and so we did her notes, and then it basically didn't change through producer's cut. So I'm really just proud of. I'm happy I made her proud, because I know that was such a special scene for her, and I think Asia's performance is so good, and that one's really special.
Yeah, so Mike, the co-editor of episode 2 with me was Jack Cunningham, my assistant, and he did the final scene where Calvin gets his run goes up on a. Can we do spoil it? The show's on the air, right? Yeah,
where Calvin gets hit by
a bus. Yeah, so he did the cut of that scene, and when I first saw it, I was like, yeah, that's it, that's perfect. Like we don't have to do anything else to it, and I think we ended up trimming a little bit to try and get to the conclusion sooner, but I just really love that scene and how well it's cut, and I think it's pretty effective.
Yeah, and it's pretty effective. Having just watched it, it was like it provoked anger in me, which maybe is the response you wanted or not response, but I was just sucked in. So it wasn't like I was like, oh, he's having a conversation about surprise, something bad's gonna it's like, there are things, if you look back, that you could probably say this isn't going to end well. But all of your work, what it, the result it has is I'm sitting there not paying attention to the millions of decisions that you're making all the time, because they're all great decisions. I'm just sucked in and like I'm enjoying myself. I'm engaged by it. So the story takes me, and instead of me like breaking it down, it's like nothing worse than a movie that's not well done that causes you to just look at all of the mechanics of it. This was really an immediately like sort of engaging emotional experience. So again, great work. It's I hope people see it. I mean, it seems like that there's some talk, right, about Pullman's performance and awards and all that. I mean, to the degree that means a damn thing, but it seems like it's getting watched and people are talking about it. Have you heard anything?
I had a friend text me the other day, a male friend of mine, who just out of the blue said, I had a really emotional experience watching the end of 5, like Bree and her daughter Mad in the diner, and he travels a lot for work, and he has a daughter about Mad's age, and he was just like, he's like, I had a real emotional release on that, just because it shows the difficulties and the nuances of being a working parent. And like I don't have kids, I don't know what that's like, but I think hearing that made me feel really good, like, oh, people really are connecting to this on a human level and emotional, and it's reaching people that I wouldn't expect.
That's great. And she's, I have kids, and I don't think she's a very specific kind of person who communicates in a very specific kind of way, and parents are parents, right? So I'm impressed at how much respect she shows for her and how she communicates with her daughter, like she's anyone else in the universe, right? That she doesn't know how to communicate any differently. And I thought, but of course I'm just like, man, I'm not that good. I'm just like, as we try. But that actually led me to something, because was it episode 4 or 5 that had the kind of fake out where you think Mad is someone who she isn't? It starts in the sport. Is that 4?
That's 4.
Yeah, this is 4 where we play with who Elizabeth's daughter is. Yeah.
Right. Which is very interesting, because instead of it just being like, it opens up an entire universe of her life and her career and the relationship with the show and the producer. And I found it to be oddly satisfying to do that because it added a level of complexity and it wasn't just a head fake. Or it started as one, but with the idea that you were going to be responsible for it.
Right. It was still in line with the fact that there's connection in life, and even though you don't know how it works just yet, you will get there somehow. Yeah.
Right. Sure.
And that was scripted. That was the way it was scripted. To play with who Elizabeth's daughter was and focus on Amanda before we moved to Matt. Yeah. And then there's that great shot that everybody did where you kind of everybody's dying in one shot when she exits the school and you finally realize who Matt is, and you see the two little girl, and then you see Walter in the background and everything. Yeah.
But I have to ask my last question because I think Gordon will find me over, he'll fly in from Toronto and smack me in the head. But we always ask, and I hope you're prepared. You were asked this, 30 minutes ago. I guess favorite film or TV show or desert island, watchable thing that you sort of like, or a thing that, I don't know, inspired you to get into this business in the first place. It could be as simple as that. But let's start with Matthew.
Oh, wait, what you asked us before was our guilty pleasure.
It could be that question. Too. Trying to make it easier to answer the question by broadening the question. So yes, it could be guilty pleasure, but
okay, here's my guilty pleasure. My guilty pleasure is The Walking Dead. I watch that show, and every season I get more and more frustrated with it. I've already seen everything now because it's over. But I would watch that, and every season I'd get so frustrated with it, and it would get tedious. And then I'd be like, I'm gonna not watch this show anymore. And then the finale of the season would come up, and I'd be like, oh, what's gonna happen next? And then I would watch the next season. I watched the whole show.
Wow. Did you ever read any of the books or no? Okay, those are a wild ride too. Laura, so you can go guilty pleasure or inspirational or both.
Interesting. Okay, I'm gonna do what got me into it because I had this realization early. I think music videos are what got me into wanting to be an editor. And there was a show on MTV when I was a kid called Making the Video. And it was like a behind the scenes look. It was like a half-hour mini doc on making a music video. And it was the Heartbreaker music video with Mariah Carey that I found on YouTube to rewatch. But I swear to God, that's the music video that made me want to get into editing, because there was a moment where they explain she sings at double speed and they film her in slow motion so that her mouth will be in sync with the track while she's in slow-mo. And that blew my mind as a kid. And I was like, this is filmmaking. So Mariah Carey is what got me into film.
Which, by the way, The Police, Every Breath You Take did before her.
I know, but there wasn't making the video for The Police. It's Mariah.
And Mariah nailed it. She did it. Maybe she did it. I don't know if she did it better. I don't know. I didn't know either one of those things was true. I just, I was just sad that MTV turned into like a reality TV channel. It was like,
I know.
What happened? Where did it go? Thank you. Geraud.
That was a good answer, Laura. Like Matthew said, two different things, but the guilty pleasure. Actually, I did an interview a year ago when they asked me, so I'm going to try to find a different answer. So you can look up what a year ago what it was, and then this year, I think I don't know. I mean, I have a few. They're all embarrassing for a grown man like me, or at least I should be. But I would say I remember definitely loving Steel Magnolias. Way back, Julia Roberts. But what got me into this, I mean, I remember very specifically, that's going to be like the spectrum of my taste. I remember going to see a re-release of Barry Lyndon when I was 13. And that was just blew my mind. Yeah.
I want to thank you, Matthew, Geraud, and Laura. Amazing work on Lessons in Chemistry. And thank you for sharing your time with me today, talking about the process and the work that you do. It was really enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
as well.
Yeah.
This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs.